Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Thank you for joining us. It is Weekend Edition. I think you're really going to enjoy these next 2 hours, and we're going to cover things pretty quickly because we have so much to cover. Kelly Shackelford with us, who is the president and CEO of First Liberty. Of course, Dr. Merrill Matthews, who is the resident scholar at the Institute for Policy Innovation. Going to talk about a number of court cases, a very important landmark school choice case, and Kelly was there to see the oral arguments. Supreme Court has given some rulings on the issue of the heartbeat bill in Texas, maybe also tipping their hand on what they are going to do a little bit later on this issue of abortion. We have the Congressional Budget Office, which, for example, was actually required to give us an honest score. You know, those of us that love sports, we want to get the right score, and the CBO was not giving a very good score because they were forced to go along with a lot of the budget gimmicks, so we have some new numbers there. And this issue of inflation has really started to make an impact. We also have a couple of good articles by Dr. Merrill Matthews on Bernie Sanders and Medicare, even GM electrical card production. And earlier this week, we talked about both China and Russia, which, again, I'd love to get these two very intelligent men to weigh in with some of their thoughts. So, again, looking forward to this opportunity. And, Kelly, let me come to you first, because I said a few things about this case coming out of Maine, but it would probably be good, once again, to explain this to our listeners. We do have listeners in Maine. And, by the way, Kelly, you haven't been around, and we've actually picked up a few stations here in Daytona Beach, Florida, Las Vegas, Nevada, and we're working on a couple others.
Let's go to Daytona and visit the station.
We need to visit all the new stations.
Yes, and so in some respects, we're introducing both of you to this for the first time. But Kelly, some of our listeners in Maine know about this, but most of our various listeners do not. So talk about this for just a minute.
Yeah, this might be the longest I've been between being on air. I've been so busy because this is our Supreme Court case for the year, and the way they have things right now, you're limited in the court, no general public. And you're limited to 2 attorneys per side, each side, and it was myself and Michael Bendis on our side. So I had to get ready for that, and he had to get ready. I had to help him get ready, and so I've just been kind of uncover for a while. So I hadn't been out on the radio. This is a really important case. It was argued exactly a week after the Dobbs case, the abortion case, and it's the religious liberty case of the term. Maine, most of its school districts do not have public schools. And because of that, for over 100 years, they've allowed parents to pick whatever school, public or private, that they wanted to, and they could use their up to the state tuition dollars to cover that. But they decided a few decades ago that they wanted to change that and exclude only the religious schools. But it's really not even just the religious schools. You can be a religious school as long as you're religious in name only. But if you actually infuse any of your religion in your teaching, the parents are told, sorry, you can't use your money there. And so a lawsuit was filed. For instance, the parents that we filed the lawsuits on behalf of, one of them, the Nelsons, they're farmers. And they literally, because of this discrimination, could not put their child in the school that they thought was best for their child, and yet they were entitled to the benefit under state law. They were just being discriminated against. And so that's what we brought the lawsuit on behalf of parents, and it's a very important case. The argument, because what it's going to do is if we win, and I do think we're going to win, it will make very clear that from now on, in every school choice program in the country, and there are a lot of them, you cannot exclude the religious schools, the Christian schools. You can't tell them they can't be a part of the program. Parents have a right to pick, and discriminating against religion is not something the government can do. And the oral argument was what we would call really hot. It was not a friendly, jovial day.
Wow.
It was very, very aggressive, and people were a little surprised. But it's just it really is a big case. And if people, by the way, from point of view, want to listen and they haven't, we actually recorded the argument so that people can listen. I don't know if we have the link at Point of View.
You do, to main school choice, and then you can actually listen and see the case summary and all of it right there.
Yeah, so you can listen. You can listen to the argument. The argument was supposed to be 1 hour and 10 minutes. It was us on the side of Christian schools and Christian parents, and on the other side was the state of Maine and the Biden administration.
Wow.
So they had two lawyers to argue, and one on our side. And so you can listen. It was supposed to be 1 hour and 10 minutes, but there were a lot of questions, as I mentioned. So it ended up being 2 hours.
So I'm going to ask a question. When you say hot, do you mean between the attorneys for the two sides, or do you mean between the justices and the attorneys?
The justices were very aggressive, very aggressive. And there were a lot of my favorite moments of the day, but one of my favorites was Justice Alito asked the question, because under this, you could literally pick any school in Maine for your children. I mean, the most expensive all-girls school in the state, Mrs. Porter's, $67,000 a year. You could pick that and use your tuition there. The only thing you couldn't use was a religious school. Mm-hmm. And so Justice Alito said, so a CRT school is okay, and the attorney for Maine had obviously been preparing for difficult hypos, but the hypo he was preparing for was a white supremacist school was okay. So he brought out that not only would a CRT school be okay under the law, but a white supremacist school would be okay. but a
religious one, oh heaven.
Yes, yeah, we can't allow that.
Making your case.
That was one of my favorite moments of the day.
That is so incredible. We need to take a break, but first of all, some of our listeners, even when we brought this up, said, didn't we have a case, I think it was Espinoza versus Montana? Yes. I mean, hasn't this already been decided? This is kind of like the Kelly Shackelford case where we have to keep arguing the case about crosses. Isn't this the same sort of thing?
Yeah, I mean, that was our argument. Look, hey, but what they were trying to do, the way they were trying to split the case, is to say Espinoza was about discriminating against schools because of their status of being religious, and this is discriminating against schools because they act religious or they teach religious. Yeah. And so, and our argument was, it doesn't really matter whether the government is discriminating against you because you're religious or because you're doing religious things. Either way, it's religious discrimination, and the Constitution actually prohibits it. And in fact, our country was founded to stop that kind of thing. So that was our argument in the court on
We're going to take a break. And one of the things I said the other day, because I don't claim to be a lawyer or play one, but I said, this distinction between status and use is a classic illustration, I would think, of trying to make a distinction with no difference. But we'll come back and talk about that. It's one of the cases we've put up there. If you'd like to hear the oral arguments, of course, you can go to firstliberty.org, but we always make it available at First Liberty. First case up there says Maine School Choice. Gives you all the information, the press releases, the summary. If you want to sit and listen to it, I would certainly encourage you to do so if that's something that would be of interest to you. We also just posted one on the Navy SEALs because that one is coming up. And of course, the Supreme Court just gave a ruling with two different votes on the issue of the heartbeat bill. So we'll stay on the courts for a little bit, but then I want to talk a little bit about the whole future of Build Back Better and Congressional Budget Office. All that coming up right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
Are there more weather-related disasters due to climate change? Activists and media would have you think that they're increasing in number and intensity. Some science fiction movies portray a dystopian future due to climate change. Now, if you're paying attention, you will notice that activists may talk about climate disasters, but they never total up the deaths from various natural disasters. Fortunately, Bjorn Lomborg has put together the facts in a chart that show we are much safer from climate-related disasters. It is true that the cost of natural disasters are often increasing, but there's a very good reason for the increase in cost. The world is getting richer, and the population has grown. That means that the number and quality of the structures in the path of floods, fires, and hurricanes have risen. There's a more accurate way of estimating the impact of weather-related damages by comparing the costs as a percentage of gross domestic product. When you do this analysis for each decade from 1900 to 2020, you see a significant decline. If you plot disaster-related deaths on a chart, you will see a sharp decline. He says a century ago, almost 500,000 people died on average each year from storms, floods, droughts, wildfires, and extreme temperatures. Over the next 10 decades, global annual deaths from these causes declined 96% to 18,000. This drop is even more significant once you realize that the global population has quadrupled. We are safer from climate disasters than we've ever been. That doesn't make for terrifying headlines or gripping science fiction movies, but it is a fact rarely covered by the media. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
Go deeper on topics like you just heard by visiting pointofview.net. That's pointofview.net.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back once again, Dr. Merrill Matthews in studio with us, as well as Kelly Shackelford. And Kelly, first of all, we've been saying through the few times we've talked about this case that it looked very good for you in light of the fact that you have other cases ranging from school choice all the way to whether or not you can use bits of rubber on the playground of a school that's a Christian school. So, I mean, we got lots of those. So I think this is going to be another case of good news when they actually issue their opinion, which is going to be months from now, right?
It will. Probably this will come down in June, when probably about the same times that they do the abortion decision. Yeah, I mean, most people expected going in that we might win this 6-3. And I think all the articles that came out of people who watched the argument or listened to the argument were similar. And even the liberal, like one of my favorite headlines of the day was from one of the liberal groups the headline was, "The separation of church and state had a disastrous day in the Supreme Court." And I was like, oh, well, I think that's really good. The idea, by the way, that it somehow violates the concept of separation of church and state to treat everybody the same is bizarre.
Yes.
You know, I mean, that's the whole argument here is, we can't. The argument of the Biden administration was, well, you have a right to the free exercise of religion, but you don't have a right for the government to subsidize it. And we're like, well, that's true, but when you create a program and you say everybody can be a part of the program and then you exclude just the religious people, that's not exactly a subsidy. That's like saying, well, everybody but religious people can use the sidewalk because we can't subsidize religious people. I mean, so it went really well. All the media reports thought it's going to be 6-3, and if it does, it'll have a big impact. I mean, take Maine alone. There's a lot of parents couldn't even ask for a religious school. No religious schools, therefore, could participate, could get the money. So if we win, there's a lot of schools that are going to be able to exist. Parents are going to be able to choose. And this is going to be multiplied all over the country. Think of how many schools are out there that now are not allowed to be chosen, that can be, that parents can pick the place that's best for their children. It'll make a big difference. When you think of the lives that are impacted by education, I mean, even one life can change so many other people's lives. And we're talking about a lot of lives impacted here when parents are given the freedom to do what's best for their children.
So let me ask this question, because sometimes the Supreme Court does the full decision, and sometimes it takes a moderated decision. It takes a step, but not going very far. Is there a way that you see that they might end up taking a step, but not actually resolving the problem?
No, I think here the way that they will do that is because you always have some limitation to your ruling, right? Because they don't want crazy stuff to happen. And so, like the hypo that occurred that was going to supposedly test us was like, well, what if there was a government program that said, you know, we want to use money to give to any entity that's creating a school, whether it's a private school or a public school. And then can we say you can't use it, though, to create a chapel, you know, at the school? And the answer is yes, that it's very different to a program that says we, the government, are providing resources for this general purpose, and the parents make the decision as to where to use the money. That's very different from the government funding directly to a religious chapel or something like that. And so I think that's a limitation, but ones that, you know, we don't necessarily object to. But I think when it comes to the school choice arena, I think this is going to be a full victory because this is the only thing left. I mean, in the past, it used to be in the 1970s or so, we had these bad decisions where the government was kind of hostile to religion because of the Lemon case that created cases that said, well, yeah, if you have a school choice program, you can't allow any of the religious groups to be a part of it. Well, that was, you know, in Zellman and then in Espinoza, they said, no, you don't have to exclude the religious schools. So the question now is, well, can you exclude them? Mm-hmm. This will be sort of the last bow, you know, on the package. And I think they're going to say, no, you can't. Really, this is no different, though, in my view, from what we went through 30 years or so ago. Widmar, Lamb's Chapel, all these cases where you had student groups that were allowed to use the facilities, you know, for their meetings. But then they told the religious group or the Christian group, well, you can't use the facility, you know. And in all those cases, the court said, no, this is, everybody's being treated the same. You know, the government's not saying we're going to give money to religion. They're saying everybody who wants to do this can participate equally. And I think that's exactly what this is.
Let's see if we can get into a good example of what Dr. Matthews was talking about, where you sort of split the difference. This issue of the heartbeat law, in which you have a 5-4 ruling that said, well, the lawsuit cannot go against court clerks and those kinds of things. So the law will still be in effect for a while. But on the other hand, in an 8-1 ruling, the challengers could sue state officials that license abortion facilities. So kind of a split decision. But for the good news, for those of us that are pro-life, that means the Texas heartbeat bill and now the heartbeat law is still in effect for the moment.
There were two cases. One was the federal government was trying to sue the state of Texas over the abortion law. And that was what got a lot of people concerned. Some of the questions during the oral argument, it was like, whoa, it should be pretty clear. The federal government hasn't been injured here. How are they bringing a lawsuit?
Right.
And so the first part was that was just dumped completely. In fact, they said it was improvidently granted, is what they said. In other words, we never should even heard an argument on this case because there's no jurisdiction here. So number one, federal government, go home. You have no authority here. And then secondly was all the deal of, well, can you bring a lawsuit if you're Planned Parenthood and these people? Can you bring a lawsuit against the court clerk? or the Attorney General or well, no, they don't have any enforcement authority over that. And can you bring a lawsuit against every possible plaintiff in the state of Texas? No, you can't do that either. But they did say, there's people who license medical facilities, and they can take the license away. They said you can sue them. So this will give them an ability to file a lawsuit to challenge the Texas law, but it'll be focused on somebody who actually has something to do and can actually take an impact as a result.
So is this the Supreme Court's final statement on the Texas law, or is there more to come?
This is just a jurisdictional statement.
Right.
It's can you bring a lawsuit? Who can bring a lawsuit? Who would you bring the lawsuit against? And it's been narrowed dramatically from what they were trying to do, which is, just think of this. The federal government brought a lawsuit against the state of Texas. Well, the state of Texas has no enforcement of this law. It doesn't work that way. Only private citizens can bring actions under this law. And the federal government hasn't been injured. So it was just
who has standing?
Yeah, they don't have any standing. So they've really narrowed this down now to what is more traditional in our system. And that's what people were scared. They were worried when they heard the oral argument that the conservatives seemed to be leaning to change the law because they were uncomfortable. And it's that's exactly what you don't want judges to do. You don't want judges to feel uncomfortable or pressure, and therefore they change the law. What's great about what happened here is this was very much the way the law should be applied, is applied. What you saw is typical. The liberals kind of just make up the rules as they go, whereas the conservatives feel like they have to go by what the statute says, the Constitution says, the precedent says, unless the precedent is just made up. They feel like they have to follow that, even if it's uncomfortable for them. And so I think this probably restored a lot of people's, confidence in that were worried that the court was going to do something kind of crazy and say, we can allow all kinds of people to bring lawsuits against all kinds of people they can't normally because we really feel pressure over the abortion issue. They didn't do that today.
Let's take a break, but you might want to get something to write with, because you might remember last week we talked about the estimate that has, I think, a reasonable estimate on the number of unborn babies that have been saved already by the Texas heartbeat law. I looked it up just now. It is up to 15,391. I think we may look back on this as a very significant time, and just imagine if some of those babies grow up, and maybe a few years from now we could actually do an interview with the mothers or some of them that have been surviving what would have been abortion.
Maybe the point of view host.
Yeah, well, could be. Ready to retire, I guess, at that point. But the point is that, you've had these abortion-minded women, and up until now they haven't had maybe I can't get an abortion. Now, some have flown out of country or out of the state or whatever, but many of them have decided to go to these pregnancy resource centers. I encourage you to pray for them, because every pregnancy center I've talked to, they're on overload with all the clients coming in, and that's good news for life. Let's take a break. We got more to cover right after this.
Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas recently said, "The Declaration of Independence has weathered every storm for 245 years. It birthed a great nation. It abolished the sin of slavery, and it endeavored to address its effects. While we have failed the Declaration time and again, and the ideals of the Declaration time and again, I know of no time," said Thomas, "when the ideals have failed us." While some see our founding as fatally flawed and promote ideas that have failed every time they've been tried, at Point of View, like Justice Thomas, we still believe in America's ideals. And if you do too, make a difference today. Join the Truth Team as we promote the unchanging truth that gave us liberty and prosperity. Visit pointofview.net/team or call 1-800-347-5151. The original Americans responded to the call. Will you? Pointofview.net/team and 1-800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
You're listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Weekend edition. If you'd like to join the conversation, 1-800-351-1212. We're going to come back to some other Supreme Court cases, but one of the things we've been encouraging you to do, and I hope most of you probably already have, we have a take action item for the Build Back Better Act, and if you click on that button that says take action, and then click on contact your senators and put in your zip code, what you will find is then you have your 2 senators, a letter that you can write, and the rest. But when we've talked about this, and I want to come to Dr. Merrill Matthews, we've pointed out in the past that the Congressional Budget Office has really been forced to actually go along with the gimmicks written into the bill. And so you've had people like Senator John Cornyn and others saying, you know what, we need an honest cost estimate of what this really is going to cost. And as a result, he said, you know, the American people deserve more than smoke and mirror accounting from Washington, D.C. Well, Dr. Merrill Matthews, drum roll please, the Congressional Budget Office now has given us a very different number than the one that everybody keeps talking about, whether it's Joe Biden, the president, Janet Yellen, who is the Treasury Secretary, and so give us the number.
Right. Well, we have competing press releases here because Janet Yellen released yesterday, I believe it was, her assessment saying that the Build Back Better, this is Janet Yellen, the Secretary of the Treasury, was fully paid for over the first 10 years and would result in $2 trillion deficit reduction in the second decade. $2 trillion deficit reduction in the second.
I don't believe a word of it.
And so,
yes.
Fortunately, Senator Cornyn and I think Senator Graham went to CBO and said, now, these provisions in here in this thing that says we're only going to do the child tax credit, let's say for a year or two, or we're only going to do some of these other programs for a year or 2 or 3 in order to make this look like affordable. What if those programs weren't actually ended at the end of a year or two because Democrats really don't want them ended? The only reason they're doing this is a budget gimmick to try to make make them balance
Very
out.
Good.
So the instead of being fully funded in the first 10 years, the Congressional Budget Office released today its assessment saying it will be a $3 trillion deficit over the first 10 years.
Whoa.
$3 trillion versus costing nothing. Remember, it was going to cost nothing. So, and this is so important for people to understand. When Obamacare came about, the taxes started in the first year.
There you go.
The program, the insurance didn't start till the 4th year out. Mm-hmm. So you had 6 years of benefits and 10 years of taxes to try to get it roughly funded well. And you knew that wasn't going to actually pan out like that. And that's the kind of thing that they're doing here. They're saying we've got several programs in here that will only last a year or 2. They don't believe that. They would absolutely extend these programs if they had a chance, or if they could get a chance, they get Joe Manchin to sign on, they would do it in this. But they're trying to do this to say the bill is paid for with the taxes that they're including, and it's just not going to work out like that. This Congressional Budget Office comes out with this, and just to give you an example of how this works, unbelievable. Back in the 90s. Democrats and Republicans said, all right, we want to make sure Medicare is paid for. So if we come up to the next year and Medicare isn't paid for, if there's going to be a deficit, we'll just cut doctors' reimbursements so that Medicare is paid for. And every time and again, they keep coming up and saying, we can't have doctors face these budget cuts, and these have accumulated. So they come in and say we're going to pay for it. And now in the bill that's going to raise the debt ceiling, they've got a provision in there which says that we're going to eliminate these Medicare doctors' cuts because it'd be terrible to cut doctors' reimbursements right now. So here we are, over 20 years later.
That's right.
And they've never actually cut the doctors' reimbursements.
And again, part of this, Kelly, I want to get your thoughts, but again, once you have these child allowances, these tax credits and everything else, we know they're never going to be revoked. And my favorite quote from Ronald Reagan, the closest thing to eternal life on earth is a government program. Does anybody think these would ever be cut? Of course not.
Yeah, people know that you have to pay for these things. I mean, they're not fooling the American people. And I'll tell you, and what just happened yesterday with this debt ceiling is a typical DC maneuver by McConnell. I mean, the Republicans could have stopped it, But instead, they had this procedural vote to make it to where they could lose with just a 50-50 tie and the vice president breaking the tie. But it didn't have to be that way. That's not what the law is. It's only because they made this vote yesterday to create this ability. So they were talking about standing strong. Remember, I mean, this is all this talk against raising the debt. We're not going to allow. And so what they did is, in the end, it'll look like they all voted against it, right? But that's not what McConnell did with this vote. And so they're playing these games. And again, even Senator Graham spoke out against McConnell on this. That's kind of surprising. So a number of them were upset, but this is the kind of thing that people get sick and tired of.
So as I understand, what they did was in the legislation that they've passed is they're allowing a one-time setting aside of the rules that you have to have 60 votes to be able to move forward.
Right.
So that by setting aside one time, then you can go forward and you can pass the budget deficit extension without Republican votes. Now, some may vote. I don't know where it'll actually go because they haven't actually pulled that up yet. But by setting this up, you actually make it easier to do this again. And you set the precedent that we can always come back and sort of do the little shenanigan again in order to make it work. Now, my sense was we're always going to get the deficit raised at some point. The question is how you were going to do it, and McConnell was going to try to make them do it in reconciliation so that they could vote for it. Only Democrats would vote for it. It's not clear the reconciliation bill is going to pass now. So they were probably going to come up with some kind of solution, and maybe this is the least bad of a solution. I don't know, but it sets the precedent that they can always go past this now.
And President Trump made a great point, which is, if you do this, you give away all your leverage.
Yes, you do.
And so, I mean, we just saw in the National Defense Authorization Act, they were going to force women in the military into the draft. There were some horrible provisions in there, but because the Republicans could have stopped the whole thing, they forced them to take a number of those things out, even though they passed, it and had some things that they wished were not in there. Well, here they just gave everything up. They said, here, we're going to let you control the debt ceiling. We're not getting anything for this. Now, that's exactly how Trump thinks, right?
Yes.
What are you getting for this? If you're going to give up and lay down, I mean, you're at least getting something, right?
Yeah, come to the negotiating table and be willing to negotiate. I know that's a concept. By the way, let me just say in passing, since you mentioned that, the take action item before this was that we didn't want to draft our daughters, and that is a victory there. But Dr. Merrill Matthews, let's talk about inflation for just a minute, because, we while we're talking about economic issues, here's one article. I didn't post all these, but people can find them. Inflation surges to a 39-year high in November, surpassing expectations. Some are now saying, well, look what that does to issues like deficit spending, climate change, but even the idea of passing a Build Back Better Act. And you can keep saying that inflation is not real, or that it's a Republican misinformation ploy or something like that. But I think almost everybody, even some people in the government now, are admitting we've got a problem with inflation.
Yes, that's right. And the Labor Department came out as 6.8% inflation. That was just 1/10 percentage point. They were expecting about 6.7. That was sort of the economist expectation. So it was right there about where it was going to be. If it had been much higher, it would have been it would have been even worse for them. But there is a little bit of good news. Is gas prices are coming down slowly a little bit. The production's ramping up.
Is that because they grabbed the emergency? Is that why? Is that why?
No. That's actually a fairly small amount.
Okay.
The Saudi Arabia said they're going to, and OPEC has said we're going to increase.
Okay. We got to go big for oil now, of course.
They're increasing that a little bit. That's helpful on some things. The pandemic has apparently slowed some economic activity down, and so that helps a little bit. So there's several things that you're looking at, and you think this may begin to start edging down a little bit, but a lot of it's here forever. I mean, it's what we call sticky inflation. You've got higher wages for people, you've got higher prices for things, and companies and workers don't want those things going down if they're getting those higher prices. So,
what do you do? I mean, we might need to come back after the break of this, but what listeners are all going, we know the inflation's coming. what do you do? Where do you put your money? What do you do to
in stable
protect
places?
yourself?
Yeah, and
Land
appreciating
and-
assets. Yeah,
I would think.
My guess is the stock market's going to do pretty well because China is collapsing on its market.
Yes.
So if you were investing in China, Evergrande and some of those things, that's going away. So you're that ends up making the U.S. the sort of the best place to go.
Yes. And again, just to put this in perspective, the last time we had even a consumer price index equal to this was June of 1982, which means that was before some of the people that will be on our Wednesday Millennial Roundtable were even born. And by the way, I think the CPI there is manipulated dramatically. So in some respects, maybe the worst inflation in our lifetime. We'll come back and talk about what that means right after this.
Oral arguments in an abortion clinic's challenge to Mississippi's law banning most abortions before 15 weeks gestation, the question has become, will Roe v. Wade and Planned Parenthood v. Casey stay or go? The Chief Justice hinted at the possibility of a narrower ruling, but attorneys for the abortion clinic and for the Biden administration argued for what National Review described as an all-or-nothing outcome, giving the court no alternative path to uphold the Mississippi law without overturning Roe. Father Frank Pavone of Priests for Life is optimistic. I was gratified, he said, to hear the kinds of questions the 6 conservative justices were asking. If Mississippi law is upheld, the state's laws on abortion will still be less restrictive than those of 39 of the 42 countries in Europe. In oral arguments, neither the lawyers for the Jackson Clinic nor the 2 pro-choice justices who spoke seriously defended Roe as a correct reading of the Constitution. Justice Sotomayor argued that to protect a life is a religious view, and to do so would create a political stench. Justice Breyer made an argument about watershed precedents that the court should be more unwilling to overrule. But Justice Kavanaugh pointed to the many times the court has overruled precedent in cases that were wrongly decided. One of those cases was Brown v. Board of Education, which served to overrule the separate but equal principles set forth in Plessy v. Ferguson. Justice Roberts seemed to be looking for a middle ground, but the 1992 Casey decision presents a problem in that it declares that states cannot create an undue burden for accessing an abortion before a fetus is viable, and no fetus is viable before 15 weeks gestation. Once the decision is rendered, if, as hoped, it overturns Roe and Casey, the states will decide their own laws regarding abortion. The people and their elected representatives will govern themselves on abortion policy. For Point of View, I'm Penna Dexter.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back once again, if you'd like to join the conversation, 1-800-351-1212. And we have Kelly Shackelford, Dr. Merrill Matthews. And Dr. Matthews, I want to come back to this because Carolyn Downey put this the other day, that if indeed you have inflation surging to a 39-year high, there are some implications to that. And first of all, the word transitory probably shouldn't be used anymore, and that is the case. And then the implications are, can you really even justify apply to some of those, quote, swing votes in the Democratic Party, whether it's Joe Manchin or Kirsten Sinema or something else, spending, now we're talking about $3 trillion of deficit, or even spending on climate change. So you're having people now saying this could be something which illustrates how the Democratic Party could be perceived as tone deaf going into election, where while we have this massive inflation, they want to have more deficit spending. They want to spend more on all sorts of government programs. They want to do more for climate change. And that doesn't bode well if you're running on that platform.
And Democrats are very, very nervous about this. The latest generic congressional poll has Republicans up about 10 points. And Republicans were up in 2010, I think in the summer right before the election. But they've never been up 10 points this far ahead in a generic poll of would you elect a Republican or Democrat?
The generic polls are always Democrats. Right?
Always Democrats, and then occasionally a few years it'll switch to Republicans by a few points. It was more in 2010 as there was a response to Obamacare, but this is a big change.
Yes.
I mean, we haven't seen this before, and you have to know Democrats are worried about it, and the things that people keep concerned about: crime and the economy, inflation, and the fact that the coronavirus is still out there, and Joe Biden had a plan. He was going to fix it. Yeah. And Afghanistan pops up every now and then. And so and right now the Social Security just announced it's going to give a 5.9% increase to seniors because seniors are hurt. Fixed income people are hurt by inflation.
Very true.
So you got this huge increase in Social Security, which doesn't have the money to increase. Right. But I've had people tell me that their Part B premiums in Medicare, you have Part A, you don't have to pay for that once you're retired. Part B, you do have to pay for that pays for physicians, and that's going up significantly. So they said, I got a raise in my Social Security, but it's all going to be eaten up by my Part B increase in premiums on Medicare.
Yeah, it's scary. I mean, again, I didn't think anybody could sort of outdo Jimmy Carter, but I mean, it's not even a close race. I mean, it's scary what's happening, and I think it's one of those things that you can do all your politicking. You can have all the smooth sound bites you've come up with. You can have every media pretty much in your pocket, but you know what? The American people know when they go to the gas pumps. They know when they go to the grocery store. They see what's happening, and they know. And this is, I think if there was an election right now, like the midterm election, I think there would be a shift of 60 to 70 seats in the House. I mean, that's a pretty bold thing to say, but I really do think it would happen. The question is, what will happen between now and November of 2022. I don't know. It would seem like things are going to be continuing to go in the same direction, but they know that there are some serious dangers right now on the Democratic side with what's going to happen because of, pretty much every category has been just mangled, whether it's foreign policy, whether it's our own economic policy. I mean, they seem to be tone deaf to the American people and their needs. This whole vaccine mandate thing, throwing people out of their jobs in the middle of all this. People are, and I thought DeSantis, he was just so tone listening versus tone deaf. His comment was, we're never going to do this. Why would you throw somebody out of their job? He totally gets the blue collar worker, the person who is trying to put food on their table in the midst of a horrible inflation. So I think they're in real trouble, but they don't seem to be getting even to talking about the right things. The base has so got control of them on their issues that they're just creating a bigger and bigger hole for themselves. And,
President Trump had Mike Pence, who he had lunch with, I think, once a week. And Mike Pence was a governor, knowledgeable member of Congress, was a restraining force sometimes, I suspect, and a moderating force, and just a wise counselor. I suspect. I've known Mike for a while.
You don't think Kamala's doing that?
And poor
There's
Joe.
Another issue there, isn't there? Wow.
Would you want Kamala coming in and providing you with advice? Oh, Oh, it's just the Democrats are in a mess right now because there's no place to go, and Joe's the only place to go, and he can't get out of the basement. When he does, he makes a fool of himself. And if you put Kamala out instead, she makes an even worse fool.
And again, they don't seem to be getting along. And a lot of people have been playing up this video, which was, of course, the line and state of, and we should mention the fact that Bob Dole died at 98. And but you again have no eye contact at all between the president and the vice president. And then even at one point where you actually have Joe Biden saying, maybe I should put my wife next to her so we don't even have to sit next to each other. It's like, okay, maybe we're reading too much into that. But you're hearing story after story.
The story after story of people quitting Kamala's office.
Wow.
And then the news story about Kamala trying to figure out, okay, how can we do a restart here so that I can actually have better, and where her people deciding, well, we think we need to let Kamala be Kamala, and others saying, no, you don't want Kamala being Kamala. It's just a mess.
Well, and again, those are just a couple of the issues. But while we're talking about resignations, one other indication that maybe some Democrats are kind of giving up. You've seen some of these chairmen of these various in the Democratic Party and some of these committees in the House saying, I'm done. And so when you have this many people retiring, that's another issue, Kelly, because now that means you aren't running against an incumbent in some of these, especially purple states or even some that are red states where you have a Democrat. That makes it a whole lot easier for Republicans to take the House.
Yeah, and the reason that's happening is all of those people know that they are going to lose the House. I mean, the Democrats are going to lose the House. The question is, by how much? So if you're a chairman, it's like, okay, if they thought they might keep it, they would probably stay.
Yeah.
But they're about to lose their authority, and so that's the reason. I mean, and again, if you're looking for anybody who probably is looking very in-depthly at the numbers, those are the people who know how to look.
And they tell you everything.
And what they're doing speaks volumes, I think.
And Larry Sabato came out yesterday pointing out that the majority of gubernatorial races are in the off-year election, in the midterm elections. And right now they're having to go through, and there'll be a couple that will likely be Democratic pickups, Massachusetts and Maryland being one.
For sure.
But several others, they're having to move from likely or leans Democratic to toss up to likely Republican or strong Republican.
Incredible. I do want to get into the vaccine mandate, which we mentioned in passing, but I want to wait to the top of the hour. One of our articles is Biden's federal vaccine mandate wipeout, which has been pretty amazing. And, of course, there have also been some votes, one which is more just a symbolic vote, but just the other day in the United States Senate voted 52-48 of a resolution to do away with the Biden vaccine mandate. Now, we know it won't go anywhere in the House, and the president said he'd veto it anyway, but it did kind of get everybody thinking that you had a couple Democrats come over, and that's John Tester from Montana, Joe Manchin from West Virginia. So I want to talk about the vaccine mandate. Kelly also has another case going up again in the courts having to do with the Navy SEALs and their vaccine mandate. So we'll talk about that. And we do have a couple of very good articles by Dr. Merrill Matthews, which we haven't really talked about. And then China and Russia have been in the news. And that does sort of reminds me of Jimmy Carter, too, doesn't it? Yes, we don't talk about Afghanistan. I mean, people always say that we don't believe in the cyclical nature of history. But, boy, there's a lot of similarity right now for those of us a little bit older. We'll take a break, though. We'll get back to the vaccine mandate and some important cases you need to know about. But we need to take a break. We'll be back right after this.
None of us like sending our hard-earned money to Washington. There's a way to avoid paying taxes and to use the money you save to fight for your values in the culture. And it's completely legal. If you make a gift from an investment account, even a retirement account, when you sell stocks or bonds to give, you have to pay capital gains taxes on the increased value of the stock. If you give the stock, there are no taxes, and you get a tax deduction for the full value of your gift. If your gift comes from an IRA, you can also make a qualified charitable distribution and skip paying taxes. This is also a great way to use that required minimum distribution. Check with your tax advisor to find what's best for your personal circumstances. But this is a way for your gift to have an even greater impact on the culture. For more information, you can call us at 1-800-347-3776. 5151. That's 1-800-347-5151. Give and save on taxes. It's a great idea. Point of View will continue after this.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kerby, for everything that you have been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of View, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is really going on, week to week in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.
Yeah, I'm just, first of all, I thank you guys. Y'all's program is wonderful, and enjoy it every day. I learn so much every time I listen to it.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. Each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging. Apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View continues right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Second hour today, and we're going to do our best, if we can, to cover some of the topics that we have listed there. We have 6 different articles. So far, we've covered 1, but again, some of those are other related issues. And if you'd like to join us, 1-800-351-1212. And again, we have Kelly Shackelford, Dr. Merrill Matthews. The second one is on the vaccine mandate wipeout, which was a piece came out from the Wall Street Journal. I understand it was under a paywall, but you can actually read it because we have it in its entirety. And Kelly, before we get to that, because it also relates to a case that you're going to be dealing with coming up next week. One of the questions off air was if President Biden has been appointing judges. Well, he has, but that's slowed down a little bit, hasn't it?
Yeah, he was going at a record pace, and finally the Republicans in the Senate started to slow things down a little bit, so he couldn't move as fast. It's been an odd. He's been appointing people. His focus has been on their race or their sex or their sexual orientation, and not as even much on their ideology. I mean, they tend to be ideological, very left wing, as you expect, but it's been more on race. And as a result, some real radicals have been appointed for some things. Not as much judges. I mean, the federal prosecutor that was just put in place in Massachusetts is off the chain, outrageous that you have somebody like that in charge of basically prosecuting federal laws. This is a person that when they were the DA decided that just a whole category of laws they wouldn't prosecute people for, and then decided that they were going to prosecute people based upon their race instead of the laws. So this is a really radical person that has said, I mean, there's not just a few things they've said, like they kind of misspoke once. I mean, it's like a litany of different things and situation after situation that make it clear. The Republicans did not vote for this U.S. attorney, or which is the head federal prosecutor there. It ended up being 50-50, and the vice president broke the tie. And so they've been appointing very radical people to a number of these positions, but on the judges, it is now slowing down. And, of course, a lot of this will be impacted by what happens in the U.S. Senate in the elections.
Yes.
The Senate has to confirm, and if the Republicans pick up seats in the Senate, things will change dramatically in these radical appointments that have been made.
And remember, you had, was it Tracy Stone Manning? Her Stone Manning was her last name, who had been involved in eco-terrorism years ago. But she was appointed to a position in the EPA, and she was confirmed.
Yeah. Yes. Well, and we have Sally Omarova, who actually was a graduate of Moscow State University, but she will not be the comptroller of the currency. Who would have guessed? I mean, we've sometimes around this table said, could you ever imagine that somebody who's a socialist run for the presidency and even have a chance of winning? Then you have somebody that went to Moscow State University and actually won the Lenin Award and is probably a pretty good Marxist and almost made their way onto the administration.
And Senator Tim Scott, I think, sort of pulled that out in the hearing as he started. She was sort of saying, well, those were things I'd said years ago when he started reading quotes from her within the past year. And that sort of really took care of that argument.
That was pretty good. So anyway, people were asking about judges and things. That's going on. But let's, if we can, talk about this. The federal vaccine mandate wipeout. That comes from the Wall Street Journal. Again, it's 3 pages. I would encourage you to read it. But Kelly, the reason it's called a wipeout is it doesn't matter whether you look at a federal judge in Georgia, whether you look at the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals. I mean, just everywhere an opportunity for a judge to look at this mandate, almost all of them have said, you don't have the authority. It's unconstitutional.
Yeah, they're being struck down appropriately across the country. Let's start with the OSHA, which this is an attempt by the president to take over every company in the country with more than 100 employees and then order them to vaccinate their employees. You know, we don't live in a country where a dictator, gives an edict and takes over all the companies. I mean, that's not how it works. I mean, this is a violation of not only the Constitution, but also even the OSHA rules. I mean, there's a procedure you go through on an emergency. You allow comments. They just ignored that. I think they knew what they were doing was totally lawless. And so when they did this, by the way, we filed 3 different lawsuits at First Liberty on behalf, because when they took over all these companies, that included every religious organization with more than 100 employees. Mm-hmm. So that included churches. That includes, so you can imagine the government thinks they're going to, and it wasn't even through legislation. It was through some edict by the president that didn't go through the proper procedures, even if he was allowed that power, which he didn't have in the first place. So 2 of those lawsuits we filed were in the Fifth Circuit. And the way it worked is there were 11 lawsuits filed there in the Fifth Circuit, and we ended up getting an injunction saying that this was clearly a violation both of federal law and the Constitution. And then what happens is, against these OSHA regs, is they take all the different circuits and they combine everything into one circuit so that they're all working, they don't get different decisions on something like this. And it got moved to the Sixth Circuit, which is highly expected to do the same as the Fifth Circuit. And we're just going through the process at this point. But most people expect that OSHA mandate that's supposed to go into place January 4th will never go into effect. I mean, it's just so clearly lawless and violates both federal law and the Constitution that it's over. And in addition to that, you've got lawsuits that have struck down the Medicaid, connected the CMS requirements, where
Medicaid, Medicare.
Yes, and then the one on independent people who are contracting with the federal government, that was struck down. And so really the only thing left is the biggest certainly left is the military. We have literally tens of thousands of people who are being threatened with court-martial and all kinds of stuff. And we're representing 35 Navy SEALs. And what they're doing to these people is not only against the law, but it's really shameful. These are people with over 350 years of combat service that have given all and that have suffered, and they're in missions right now all over the world. And the idea that they have a right under federal law to ask for a religious exemption, and for asking, they're being threatened with court-martial, their families are being abused. What's going on? You've got a military that doesn't think right now it has to follow the law. That's a very dangerous thing. And we'll be in court January 20th. And hopefully we'll get some relief, not only for these SEALs, but that really protects everybody who's serving us in the military.
Let me just mention some of that came really fast and furious, but yesterday we posted a piece that actually had at the very end kind of a little chart of the 5 different mandates, but I think you got it pretty good, and we'll come back and talk a bit more about the Navy SEALs. But OSHA stayed nationally, CMS enjoined nationally, federal contractor enjoined nationally, federal employee punted till next year, and then you have the one in military. Still moving ahead, unvaxxed are flagged, blocked from promotion, re-enlistment, and being hassled. So again, we'll come back and talk about that in a little more detail. And if you would like to join the conversation, feel free to join us, 1-800-351-1212. The second article is on the vaccine mandate and also the case that Kelly mentioned. If you scroll all the way down, we have posted that. It says Navy SEALs file federal lawsuit. And we'll come back and talk about that right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
Are there more weather-related disasters due to climate change? Activists and media would have you think that they're increasing in number and intensity. Some science fiction movies portray a dystopian future due to climate change. Now, if you're paying attention, you will notice that activists may talk about climate disasters, but they never total up the deaths from various natural disasters. Fortunately, Bjorn Lomborg has put together the facts in a chart that show we are much safer from climate-related disasters. It is true that the cost of natural disasters are often increasing, but there's a very good reason for the increase in cost. The world is getting richer and the population has grown. That means that the number and quality of the structures in the path of floods, fires, and hurricanes have risen. There's a more accurate way of estimating the impact of weather-related damages by comparing the costs as a percentage of gross domestic product. When you do this analysis for each decade from 1900 to 2020, you see a significant decline. If you plot disaster-related deaths on a chart, you will see a sharp decline. He says a century ago, almost 500,000 people died on average each year from storms, floods, droughts, wildfires, and extreme temperatures. Over the next 10 decades, global annual deaths from these causes declined 96% to 18,000. This drop is even more significant once you realize that the global population has quadrupled. We are safer from climate disasters than we've ever been. That doesn't make for terrifying headlines or gripping science fiction movies, but it is a fact rarely covered by the media. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
Go deeper on topics like you just heard by visiting pointofview.net. That's pointofview.net.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back once again, 1-800-351-1212. Dr. Merrill Matthews and Kelly Shackelford. And let me take a phone call because while we're talking about the vaccine mandate, I think we've got a good opportunity here to maybe get a story. So, John, tell us your story. It sounds pretty tragic.
Yes, sir. I've been with my company 28 years, and I was told I have till December the 31st. And I'll be suspended, and then I'll have 30 days. If I do not take the vaccine within that 30 days, I'll be terminated.
So is that are you a government contractor, or is just your company setting that rule?
Just my company setting that rule. And we have Governor Abbott has what do you call it? Where he signed it, where you don't
executive order. Yeah.
Yeah, executive order. There you go. And but they're still pushing forward.
Well, here's the thing. I want to make sure. I think your call is a good one because for everybody out there who has a situation with their employer where you're being threatened or told you have to take the vaccine against your beliefs, if you have religious beliefs against it, there is federal law that protects you. And you have a right to a religious accommodation if it's at all possible, and it is. And I'll just tell you this: we had so many calls. We could have had 20,000 lawsuits. We can't do that many lawsuits at First Liberty. We just don't have that capacity. So what we did is, and we have on our staff the two top lawyers, past top lawyers at HHS, who are in charge of all of the religious liberty and conscience exemptions from healthcare law. So they knew the law. So we created a resource, and if you go to firstliberty.org, it's our religious liberty protection kit for vaccine mandates, and it lays out for you what are your rights, what is your law. In whatever situation, whether you're in the military, it has a section on that. Whether your employer is the federal government or you just have a private employer, it all lays it out, and it even has sample exemption requests. And so most people, not everybody, but most people have gone there, have done that, have been exempt. They've kept their jobs. I mean, I can't tell you how many calls we've got from people saying, weeping, saying, I thought my career was over. And thank you. And we're like, well, we didn't do anything. That's just the law. I mean, we just put it up there. So if you know somebody who is in that situation, they have to ask for it to get it, And so a lot of people are intimidated out of their rights. Oh, you don't ask for that, you're not going to get it. Well, then you have no rights at that point. You can't enforce anything. But if you ask, usually you get it. If they don't give it to you, you have a right to go to the EEOC. You have a right to bring a lawsuit, and which is why most companies realize that, and they're going to grant their religious exemptions because it's not a major percentage of the company. But there are many people who have a religious objection to taking the vaccine, and they have every right under the law. It's been in place for a long time to seek that. And so I want people to know they can go to firstliberty.org and get the information on what the rights are there.
Might just mention, obviously, when you go there, you're going to say, okay, where do I find it? Scroll down about halfway. There's a blue banner that says vaccine mandate help. And they have one for religious, one for military, and one for other legal help. So, Again, sometimes when you go there, you go, okay, now where do I go? You just scroll down about halfway. You'll see a blue banner. And that's where you'll find some of that information. So, John, appreciate your phone call. Let me jump up to Alaska for just a minute. KJNP. Elmer, what would you like to ask?
So, Mr. Matthews was talking the other day about giveaways in the Build Back Better to the unions. And I can't remember exactly I thought it was about union dues, about deductibility of union dues and some other union.
Right. Things. Yeah. In the Build Back Better, they allow union dues up to $250 to be tax deductible.
Yeah, so I would like to know if you guys, as members of broadcasters associations, and maybe if you have any other professional groups you're affiliated with, deduct fees from your taxes, fees and membership stuff from your taxes.
Membership fees and all that? I don't know. We do.
Well, there's two things. In some cases, various trade associations and other things that employees can be members of.
Yes.
Trade associations or something of that nature. And my guess is in some cases, if they're self-employed, they may be able to deduct some of those. If they're not self-employed, they may not be able to deduct those. But union dues have... They had a provision in there that if your union dues, if I remember right, it sort of worked like the medical provision. If it was above a certain amount, then you were able to take that amount above it. But they're sort of moving just to provide that straight to up to $250 deduction now. And the point I was making at that point was not whether or not you should be able to do something like that. My point was historically 501c3 organizations, nonprofits, could not engage in political activity.
There you go.
And so we couldn't. I'm a member of. I work for a 501c3. We can't go out and support candidates. We can't say vote for this piece of legislation. We can say this piece of legislation could affect your income or could have this impact on the economy, but we can't support or oppose certain legislation or candidates. And so by allowing that for union dues, because unions are all involved in political advocacy, both for legislation and for candidates. And I posted in the piece that I wrote on there, I think, I can't remember the name. Open Secrets right now has something like $34 million, I think, and unions have spent on lobbying for Build Back Better and the other legislation. So my point was, if you're gonna restrict if you're going to restrict organizations from being able to engage in that, it shouldn't be tax deductible, because you don't want people who disagree, in essence, subsidizing people engaged in political activity.
Makes good sense. And again, that's the article that we posted last Friday. Of course, you can find it at IPI. Just before we take a break, Kelly, give us an update just on the Navy SEALs part of that, because first of all, these are healthy guys. I bet they can take the vaccine or not take the vaccine. I think they're going to just do fine. I mean, but what's going on with that particular case?
Well, it's really just an example of the insanity. And I mean, 350 years of combat service, over 100 different combat missions. Some of them suffer from PTSD and other things from what they've done for our country. And the idea, and as you say, a number of them have immunity already, from natural immunity, from having it. Those who don't, I mean, these are the healthiest people you're ever going to meet, and they don't put things into their body for that reason. They can fight off almost anything. And the idea that they ask for what is their right under the law. There's federal law that's very clear. They can ask for a religious accommodation. For asking for that, they've been threatened in the worst ways. I mean, we're going to court-martial you. We're going to dishonorably discharge you. We're going to take your trident away.
We're going to charge you for what you had for training.
$1 million or more. We're going to tell you got to pay $1 million.
This is how we treat the best fighting force in the world.
And they've even threatened their families, which they have no authority over their families. So this is really disgraceful what they're doing. It's also really stupid as far as, let's get rid of our most elite people in our military. This is not good for, protecting our country and having the best military. And so I would really encourage people to pray for these SEALs, for the success, especially pray on December 20th, because I think in that hearing, and we're asking for an injunction that the Department of Defense be enjoined from this type of activity. It will not only help these SEALs, but these SEALs are really, as they always do, they're leading the way for everybody else. And there are a lot of people in the different, I think I saw over 10,000 in the Air Force. I think they're close to that in the Marines. There are a lot of people who are in these types of situations right now. And we've got a military that's just not following the law. And you can't do that. And, look, what it reminds me of is, right, the first thing they did when the new administration took over is they said the biggest problem in the military is, quote, extremism. And they never defined that. And they created a task force. This is an ideological purge. These are the people who have a conscience, who have religious beliefs, who are following the law. And this is an idea of just purging these people. These are not the people we want purged. These are great Americans who are following, the tradition that we've always had here, that some people have religious objections to certain things. They're willing to work around it, to do whatever they need. But that's not the approach they're taking. They're taking the approach that we don't have to follow the law. We can even punish you for asking for us to look at the law and to try to accommodate you.
We'll take a break, and we have in the last half hour a couple of very good articles by Dr. Merrill Matthews, and did want to get some comments around the round table. Is Russia going to work their way into Ukraine? What about China and Taiwan? We'll talk about that right after this.
Having civil conversations about important issues seems to be harder and harder. Various media outlets tell people what they should believe, why they should be outraged, and getting people to actually think, well, it can be difficult. Whether it's the gospel, tax issues, social policy, or just about anything else, you need to have solid information and clear thinking to address the hard issues. You need God's truth applied. And that's what you get in less than 2 minutes with Point of View's Viewpoints Commentary, a daily resource to help you be informed and think through the things we need to be talking about. It is free and will arrive in your inbox each day when you visit pointofview.net/signup. Sometimes we know we should say something, but we're silent because we're not quite sure what to say. Viewpoints Commentary can help you break the silence and change the narrative. It can make you a more equipped agent for truth. Get your free subscription to the Viewpoints commentary at pointofview.net/signup. pointofview.net/signup. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Final half hour. If you'd like to join the conversation, 1-800-351-1212. Let me just, as a program note, mention that on Monday we'll have George Barna with us. On Tuesday, Alex McFarland. We have a Millennial Roundtable on Wednesday, John Dixon on Thursday, and, of course, another roundtable of Weekend Edition. And we'll be a while before we have Kelly, but I think we'll still get him on before the end of the year. And I thought I might just mention that these are three different organizations that are highly dependent upon year-end giving. You've heard Kelly say before that lots of times there at First Liberty, they have to kind of figure out what they're going to do for the year of 2022. So I would encourage you to support First Liberty. As I've said before, I'm not asking you to do something I don't do. I do give to that organization. I would hope you would support IPI, which is the Institute for Policy Innovation. And if you have anything left over, Point of View could benefit from that as well. But again, we would encourage you to support any of these ministries, including the local radio station that carries this program, because again, they are so dependent upon your gifts, and we are as well. Let's, if we can, for just a minute, also talk about maybe Russia first. When the Warsaw Pact kind of collapsed and you had the end of the Soviet Union, there was sort of an agreement that you wouldn't necessarily take some of these Eastern European countries and make them part of NATO. Well, they did anyway. And the sticking point, apparently, with Vladimir Putin is you're now trying to make Ukraine a NATO member, and so that's his justification. I want to go around the round table and get some comments about that for why he's actually putting troops at the border between Russia and Ukraine. If you're not familiar with your geography, what's the largest country in Eastern Europe? Russia. What's the second largest country? Ukraine. They have a border. Don't forget also, of course, that they marched into Crimea.
Right.
And you just have all sorts of things going on. So, Dr. Merrill Matthews, first of all, we're not even going to talk about China for a minute, but what about Russia? Also, what could happen if you have Russian troops in Ukraine and you have China trying to take Taiwan at the same time? I would hope that our president would be lucid enough to know what to do.
Yes, I wouldn't hold my breath on that. But it's interesting because we don't know what Putin is up to here. We don't know whether he's just trying to get concessions, whether he's just trying to sort of move, because he and the Russians to some extent have wanted to regain the sort of the sense of power that they had at one point in the past. And they don't have that now. And so that he's been on a gradual move outward. This is not new. Going back to one of the reasons why Nixon made the outreach to China in 1972, which actually started in 1971 with Henry Kissinger. China under Mao and Russia had been working together, but then China got to be concerned that Russia was going to try to sort of move into its territory because China did not have a lot of defenses and so forth. And so there was an outreach to the U.S. to try to create among these three powers which two are going to team up against to stop the other one from moving. So we don't know if Putin is serious about this. We know he's serious about Crimea, but we don't know if he's serious about Ukraine or just rattling the cages, or testing to see if Biden is just simply not up to the position. And if not, maybe we'll move in there and claim that Ukraine was actually moving into our territory.
Yeah, and one of the things I mentioned just the other day is that Pat Buchanan made a comparison to this young Democratic president, which Nikita Khrushchev was convinced probably was going to be a pushover, and then wanted to establish short-range nuclear missiles in Cuba. And of course, you remember, those of us old enough remember the Cuban Missile Crisis, the quarantine, and the rest.
It.
And again, a lot of that is, okay, how far can I push? And is there a sense in which the other day when they had this video conference between Vladimir Putin and, of course, Joe Biden, did he come away thinking, well, this is a president with resolve, or is this a president I can push over?
Remember when Lloyd Benson said, I knew John Kennedy. John Kennedy was a friend of mine. You're no John Kennedy.
I do remember all that. And so
that's true of Biden.
Yeah. And so, again, there's just a real question, Kelly.
Well, I don't think there's much a question. I think people know after Afghanistan and after just the way Joe Biden is handling himself, he can't even read speeches. He's reading things at the end of the speech that says, come to a close right now. I mean, he's clearly out of his depth, and we look weak, and it's very dangerous because we easily could have. I think that's part of why. Does anybody think Putin would be doing this if Trump were president? I don't think so. And And I don't think we would have the danger we have with Taiwan as well. So I think it's clear what's going on. And I think a lot of people don't know. I know you do, but a lot of people don't realize how many Christians are in the Ukraine. You've got in Russia, you've got sort of forced atheism a lot because of the Marxism and the history there. But there is a tremendous, the legislature even there, the leaders, these are outspoken believers. And so this is more than just an attack upon a neighboring country. It's two very different approaches to life. Sort of Marxism and Christianity are two polar opposites, and you can't have one without the other, really. I mean, if you're going to have Marxism, you got to get rid of Christianity. And if you're Christian, you don't believe in Marxism, which is basically a belief in atheism and all kinds of horrible things that you will do to other people with your power. And so we need to pray for the people in Ukraine. We need to pray that they don't see the weakness of the president as a reason to go and invade the Ukraine. This is a very important situation for us to be praying about.
When you said that about Ukraine and the Christian element, I every once in a while get to go to Hungary and teach at the Word of Life Bible Institute. And they've asked me if I would go and teach at the Ukraine Bible Institute. I'm thinking if I suggested that, my wife would want to have a conversation with me right now. But it illustrates again how it actually has a Bible Institute, not unlike what we have here in the country, training some of those future Christian leaders in Eastern Europe. So that's how Christian that is. And so again, we certainly should be praying about the president in terms of Ukraine and what's going on with Russia. But you mentioned China in passing. When you have China, which probably has the most dominant navy in the world now, and certainly has access to many more opportunities to take Taiwan. Dr. Merrill Matthews, there seems to be a fair amount of evidence. And by the way, this article on China and Russia reminds us that not only when you talk about taking over Taiwan in terms of land, but in terms of microchips, and also China, as we talked about the other day, now establishing what could be a military base in Territorial Guinea, in Africa, giving them a port in Atlanta, and all sorts of things that exist. This is a dominant power, and again, I just don't get the sense that President Biden really wants to challenge them.
I'm not sure he's up to the task. That's right. The China has, if it's not the largest, the second largest, it also has the largest standing army. And a reasonable person could say, if you're not thinking about expanding, why would you necessarily need that? And they've already tested the borders with India. Yes. They are, and they're rattling the sabers with Taiwan, and they are building islands in the middle of the South China Sea and putting military bases on there, and then claiming this is our land. So we get to claim several miles of sea that's ours, and you can't pass that. So the U.S. is actually running ships through that to try to maintain the open seaport, the seaways. So it's threatening. I think I would be surprised if China were to go and invade Taiwan anywhere in the near future, but it certainly could, and if it perceives Biden as weak, and I think most of us do, it opens a door, and you don't want that door opened.
Yes, and again, I've said that probably after the Winter Olympics in China.
We're safe till then.
Yeah, but you got COVID-19, and you've got some of the disarray, even in NATO right now. You've got, of course, this botched withdrawal of Afghanistan. So could it be that both things happen simultaneously? You would need a military strategist in the Oval Office, and I just don't think we have someone there right now.
But Kerby, I mean, our diplomats are not going to the Olympics, so everything's going to change, right? Yes. I mean, this is the kind of thing.
Diplomatic boycott.
To me, this is the kind of the way the Biden administration is handling these things. I mean, I would rather us not say anything rather than just say we're not sending our diplomats to the Olympics. So there. It just shows massive weakness. That is not what a President Trump or a President Reagan would do. That would not be their approach.
And apparently, Biden has negotiated with Germany to say if Russia invades Ukraine, then Russia will cut off the Nord Stream 2 pipeline. Not Russia, but Germany. But Germany needs the natural gas coming through that to keep places. It gets cold in Germany.
I know. And I just said, I've been in Hungary when I say, it's so cold. And they said, well, they haven't turned the heat on, because these are the former satellites of the Soviet Union. So Soviet Union controls that. But you can imagine right now saying to Germany, well, we're just going to let you freeze in order to punish Russia. And Russia's going to go, well, we don't care. And so this is just insane. Senator Tom Cotton the other day spoke out against these half measures having to do with China. So we'll give him credit for that as well. We come back, though, we got a couple of good articles by Dr. Merrill Matthews. And don't forget that next week we are going to be covering lots of issues. And if you didn't get a chance to ask a question, make a comment, feel free to join us then. We've posted those articles. And before we're done, I also want to send you to these two websites, ipi.org as well as firstliberty.org. So we'll talk about that right after this.
Oral arguments in an abortion clinic's challenge to Mississippi's law banning most abortions before 15 weeks gestation, the question has become, will Roe v. Wade and Planned Parenthood v. Casey stay or go? The Chief Justice hinted at the possibility of a narrower ruling, but attorneys for the abortion clinic and for the Biden administration argued for what National Review described as an all-or-nothing outcome, giving the court no alternative path to uphold the Mississippi law without overturning Roe. Father Frank Pabon of Priests for Life is optimistic. I was gratified, he said, to hear the kinds of questions the 6 conservative justices were asking. If Mississippi law is upheld, the state's laws on abortion will still be less restrictive than those of 39 of the 42 countries in Europe. In oral arguments, neither the lawyers for the Jackson Clinic nor the 2 pro-choice justices who spoke seriously defended Roe as a correct reading of the Constitution. Justice Sotomayor argued that to protect a life is a religious view, and to do so would create a political stench. Justice Breyer made an argument about watershed precedents that the court should be more unwilling to overrule. But Justice Kavanaugh pointed to the many times the court has overruled precedent in cases that were wrongly decided. One of those cases was Brown v. Board of Education, which served to overrule the separate but equal principles set forth in Plessy v. Ferguson. Justice Roberts seemed to be looking for a middle ground, but the 1992 Casey decision presents a problem in that it declares that states cannot create an undue burden for accessing an abortion before a fetus is viable, and no fetus is viable before 15 weeks gestation. Once the decision is rendered, if as hoped it overturns Roe and Casey, the states will decide their own laws regarding abortion. The people and their elected representatives will govern themselves on abortion policy. For Point of View, I'm Penna Dexter.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back for a few more minutes. Let me just mention that one of the articles we have here by Dr. Merrill Matthews called it Bernie Sanders and Medicare. And it's important because here you even have a senator who really wants to try to move us towards a socialized view of health care. And you point out the fact that Medicare already has dental, vision, and hearing. So if some of this is not necessarily top of mind for a United States Senator, let's do some education here, Dr. Matthews, because a lot of that comes through Medicare Advantage, right?
Right. And what Bernie Sanders wanted to do, since he was not going to be able to completely socialize the U.S. healthcare system, he wanted to have vision, hearing, and dental added to Medicare for the population. They did polling, very popular among seniors and so forth.
Could you imagine?
But what I pointed out is in Medicare, if you move to a Medicare Advantage program, and that's a private sector health insurance plan in Medicare that's available to Medicare people on Medicare, about a little over 40% of the seniors voluntarily choose to do that. Virtually all of the plans have dental, vision, and hearing in there, and it's something like 93% will have a dental provision in there. I think 99% have a hearing provision or vision. So you can get those, and now these are typically limited. They may be, if it's a vision plan, they may have a $2,000 limit, or a dental plan $2,000 limit in a year. So it doesn't cover everything, but it does cover a lot of it, and for the average person, it's going to cover most of those costs. And it doesn't cost you anything extra. The various plans have different elements in there, and you need if you're going to do that and you're in Medicare, you need to talk with somebody who is familiar with this, an agent who deals with it, but let them go over the various provisions, and you might find one that works really well for you that covers those things.
So again, you're kind of our expert on healthcare. I want to maybe now switch hats on you, because you're also been kind of our expert on energy. And for example, my commentaries over the last couple of days, yesterday was on the book Unsettled by Dr. Stephen Koonin. Of course, you've had a very good session with an individual that has challenged some of these issues as well. My commentary today really is based upon this idea of climate disasters. And of course, your piece here about can General Motors increase electric vehicle production 2,800%
in 4 years?
In 4 years. And I think it's appropriate because, Kelly, you and I have been talking about the fact this is just warm weather right now. I think they're going to actually set records in some parts of where we broadcast of being so warm. So everybody's saying, well, climate change is here and all the rest. But it gets back to this whole issue of climate change and the attempt to try to increase the number of electric vehicles, which I just don't think we're ever going to be able to meet that need. What's your thoughts?
General Motors came out a few years ago and said that they're going to have that by the end of 2025. They want 40%, a little over 40% of their fleet of offerings, of car offerings and trucks, to be fully electric vehicles. And that just got me thinking, okay, so how many do you sell, and what percentage of them? Because you do have the Chevy Bolt, which is their only, is their only electric vehicle right now, and they put that on the market 2017. This year they've had to recall all of them.
Isn't that something?
All of them because of problems with the battery. They had to release a statement saying, we discourage you if you've got a Chevy Bolt, park it away from a building and don't plug it in overnight.
That's scary.
So that's their experience with it. But now they do want to try to move, and they've got a number of options. I've seen pictures of the Cadillac Lyriq, which is a beautiful car that they had thought they would have out this year. Looks like it's going to be next year sometime. And the price, I think, if I remember right, starts about $60,000. If you get the fully loaded Cadillac Lyriq, it's going to be in the $90,000 range. And I'm sitting here thinking, do you really think you're going to have 40% of your models in 4 years? You've had one car out there for 5 years. It has been a disaster, and it doesn't sell. It's about 3% of the cars sold by GM are those, but yet you're going to have 40% of them in 4 years. It's just, even if you think it's a good idea, and I'm not making a case whether or not it's good to do that. It's just whether or not that's actually doable.
Yeah, and you get so many of these slogans. It sounds nice, but then you get into the reality. I've said before, if you read Bill Gates' latest book, he talks about all things that would have to happen for us to meet those deadlines. Right. You know we won't be able to meet those deadlines. You know we can't. And let me add one more thing. We just talked about China a minute ago. Where do those rare earths come from? China or other African countries that China controls?
China's been a major battery producer. They're trying to build the batteries and so forth, and they're going to have to make a lot of. And then you just got the issue of charging stations.
Yes.
Unless you get thousands and thousands of charging stations around. And now there's the issue of the charging desert, because they're not putting the charging stations in low-income areas. So are low-income areas not going to be able to get some of these cars?
So again, Kelly, it's just, again, back to the idea that it sounds real good when it comes off the lips and it's in a party platform and people talk about it. But when you get down to the harsh reality, we're not going to get there.
It's almost like the centralized control of the economy doesn't work.
Oh, what a concept.
Oh, wait, that's communism. Yes. The free market works a lot better. There's this other guy. What's his name? I think he's come up with electric cars.
Yeah, but it actually took him a long time to do it. And he's got a beautiful car, but they're the only ones that are actually selling these things.
Yeah, Tesla.
Isn't that amazing? That
was more free market. Although he got a lot of government benefits,
he
but
did.
still.
Well, hey, why not, right? But the point is, you got to go by the market. If you provide an excellent car, and you get it to the right price, and you get the batteries that work, and you're going to sell them.
Yep.
And so the answer is not the government fiat of we're going to do such and such and these sort of, pie in the sky, statements. It's about the market, and it's about serving. What I love about the free market is those who serve best are the ones who get rewarded.
That's right.
And so we will have, it's just the way it works. Things will get better. They will get cheaper. Things will, and they will get richer because of that, and people will have access to it. But it's not going to be created by the government. It's going to be created by very entrepreneurial people who are competing in the United States and getting things lower in price and better in quality. That's what happens with a free market.
Dr. Merrill Matthews, we've posted a couple of your articles. You have some ones, as well as your colleagues have written some great things on all sorts of topics, rating from, cryptocurrency and issues of energy and tax policy and all the rest. So IPI.org.
IPI.org, and people can go there and download anything. It's all free for reading, consuming, and sharing.
And you just had one today on the intellectual property, in case you people want to watch that. Mm-hmm. And speaking of watching, of course, at First Liberty Live, you can watch some of this. But again, at First Liberty, if people want to know a little bit more, we've made it easy for them to find it because we have a case listed there on the main school choice, and then the other one on the Navy SEALs. So again, or you can just simply go to firstliberty.org, right?
If they've got 2 hours and want to listen to the Supreme Court argument, they can do that. If they just want to read up on the Navy SEALs case and maybe share that with some other people, maybe some prayer groups, December 20th is the date that'll be argued. But there's plenty of info there, and we're also involved in the OSHA cases, and they can follow that as well. And I think the main thing is if they're not following these things and want to get our weekly email, just to make sure and sign up there for the email, which we'll send out for them. Obviously, no charge or anything, just to keep people up to date and make sure they're praying and involved in the battles.
Don't forget supremecoup.com, right, because, again, they all got together and said, should we pack the court? And I go, no, I don't think so. But you'll be continuing to follow that one as well. So just so many things to talk about. We certainly encourage you to find all of the articles. I think we have a half a dozen there for you to read. And also we have the links to First Liberty and IPI. And, of course, also you can find all of that at pointofview.net. If you can support any or all of these organizations, I know they would appreciate that before December 31st. I want to thank Andrew and Steve for the help behind the scenes. Have a great weekend. We will see you back here on Monday.
None of us like sending our hard-earned money to Washington. There's a way to avoid paying taxes and to use the money you save to fight for your values in the culture. And it's completely legal. If you make a gift from an investment account, even a retirement account, when you sell stocks or bonds to give, you have to pay capital gains taxes on the increased value of the stock. If you give the stock, there are no taxes, and you get a tax deduction for the full value of your gift. If your gift comes from an IRA, you can also make a qualified charitable distribution and skip paying taxes. This is also a great way to use that required minimum distribution. Check with your tax advisor to find what's best for your personal circumstances, but this is a way for your gift to have an even greater impact on the culture. For more information, you can call us at 1-800-347-5151. That's 1-800-347-5151. Give and save on taxes. It's a great idea. Point of View is produced by Point of View Ministries.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have.